You're listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. Hey, welcome to Arcane Carolinas. I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw, and I did nothing to prepare for today.
I am your co-host, award-winning novelist, Michael G. Williams.
You did a lot to prepare for today.
Yeah, I did a lot to prepare for today. Originally, we were going to talk about what you had suggested was the gray people of South Carolina. I'm making air quotes. I'm sure everybody can hear that when I say the gray people, but I'm not even sure you can see it. But anyway.
I can't.
There you go.
One of the comments that we've gotten from doing live stuff is that the audience can tell when I'm enthused because I begin to gesture wildly.
That's true. You do turn into a hand talker when you're like really into it.
Okay. Now I'm self-conscious. But okay.
No, it's not that it's a bad thing. I'm a hand talker anywhere from like just woke up to screaming.
I'm just imagining like see, but when you say that, I imagine myself going full Kermit the Frog, like
No, that's me when I see a UFO at Sunset Beach. So we're going to talk about the gray people, but yesterday when we were talking about this episode before recording it, I said, gosh, there is so much to this. There's so many different stories. I don't know how I can fit it all into one episode. And you said, why don't we just make it a little mini series like the Sasquatch mini series? So this is episode 1 of probably 3 of the gray people of South Carolina. And interestingly, episode 2 will happen in the same place as this one, but be a totally different story and totally different kind of experience. So we're going to start today with the classic story of the gray man of Pawleys Island in South Carolina. So Pawleys Island, South Carolina is a barrier island in Georgetown County, South Carolina. It's roughly halfway between Myrtle Beach to the north and Charleston to the south. And it's a few miles. In fact, like the island, quote unquote, of Pawleys Island is part of what is called the Waccamaw Neck, which is this peninsula that extends into Winyah Bay. And Winyah Bay is where the Great PD River empties into the Atlantic Ocean. There are a bunch of rivers in South Carolina that empty into Winyah Bay. And the region overall is like nothing but salt marshes and swamps, basically. And much like I've talked about with Sunset Beach, or like anybody who's been to Myrtle Beach and things like that knows, Pawleys Island is sort of renowned, like all barrier islands, for constant breezes, like very windy conditions. The area now known as Pawleys Island was originally part of the home region of the Waccamaw tribe and the Winyah tribe, and the bay, Winyah Bay, is named for the latter of those. These were both Eastern Siouan people who had been pushed to the coast by more aggressive Iroquoian tribes moving into the area now known as South Carolina. Remember, we talked about that happening with like the Westo in the 1600s, but this is stuff that had happened way before that. And we talked about the Westo and the Hound of Goshen Hill for people who are listening. Those tribes adapted really well to the salt marsh, the bay, that sort of coastal environment. And the Waccamaw and the Winyah lived very peacefully next to each other. And a lot of what I read, you can sort of think of them more as neighboring towns than as like different peoples. But they engaged in extensive cultivation and harvesting of shellfish as a food staple. They constructed homes and public buildings from magnolia trees and pine trees that they felled for lumber. Their shellfish harvests resulted in them creating these enormous oyster and clamshell middens. You know, like waste dumps.
Yep.
Unique for the fact they contain evidence of fires to cook or to smoke dry the shellfish and pottery shards, but not the bones of larger animals. In most middens for oyster shells and clam shells found in North America, there are like other animal bones mixed in, but these are like nothing but shellfish and the fires used to cook them. And so that's like, it's really unique among North American tribes that they relied so heavily on that food source and were really able to sustain it there.
We've actually gotten requests to talk about shell mounds.
Really?
Yes, we have. It's in the big bucket of ideas that we have. That's long as my arm. It's in there to talk about shell mounds. So that's great.
Well, wow. Let us initiate that topic here then as something we will definitely talk about, because in part of the research for this, I haven't heard back from him yet, but in part of the research for this, I emailed a professor at the University of South Carolina whose area of expertise is the archaeology of these specific shell mounds.
He's a shell moundologist.
He's a shell moundologist.
Dr. Quack. That's NC State has Dr. Quack.
Oh, yes, that's right.
That's actually the guy's name. Like, I'm not being a jerk.
Yeah, no, it really is. His actual name is Dr. Quack. It's
pronounced Quack.
Oh my God. I really hope kind of that it is. And that he says that a lot. So just one of the things that was really interesting about those shellmans to me is there is a possibility that they didn't only serve as waste dumps, but also as territorial boundary markers. Like, sure. Hey, everybody, when you see these, that's our turf.
Hey, I mean, like, yeah, just because they got along doesn't mean they didn't have boundaries. Like, I like my neighbor, but it would be really weird to find him in my backyard, which I have done. He has done that, actually, and it was very weird. I caught him. I guess he thought I wasn't home, and I caught him weed whacking in my backyard. Just looked out there and was like, I mean, that's thank you, I guess. I was going to get to it this weekend.
Right. I feel like there's an editorial comment there.
Right. It's Thursday. People got to work. Sorry. Anyway. So yes, I would buy the boundary marker theory because I think my neighbor's great. We get on splendidly. He'll never hear this.
Yeah. It's very, very weird. And so there's been ongoing archaeological.
Hold on. And for the record, I keep a tidy lawn. It's a point of pride for me that I have a well-manicured lawn.
I have seen your lawn, and that is true.
I cut it different directions each week. Like I'll do it I'll do north to south one week, and then the next week I'll do east to west. I seed the bare patches. I do all the things you're supposed to do for turf grass management. This guy comes over and just starts whacking my weeds.
I suggest you play this really loudly from your back deck or something, so that he can hear it one day.
Oh, Charlie has lost his marbles. He's sitting over there listening to himself. Sorry, I kind of grabbed the wheel from you on that one.
No, that's okay. That is totally okay. Because we are eventually going to talk about the middens, I'm only briefly going to mention this point. Archaeological research into them at the middens in this area specifically has been in progress since the 90s, and these middens are not like new or even recently old. They date back as far as 2500 BCE and very likely as far back as 4000 BCE when shifting sea levels created something more or less like the current coastline of South Carolina. The Waccamaw people called what we call the Waccamaw River coming and going because the river would ebb and flow with the tide in the salt marshes. Yeah. And that's where their name for themselves comes from. And the Waccamaw and Winyah people gave the name Chicora, or the land, to what we call Pawleys Island. In 1526, Spaniards made landfall on the Waccamaw Neck, that peninsula that I said Pawleys Island is a part of.
Hola!
But they left after a year of hostile encounters with locals because that's
no mas.
It seems to be like a big theme of their experience in what's now the American Southeast. The Spaniards would show up. They would be jerks to everybody. Everybody would be jerks to them, and then they would leave.
And then the British would stumble in behind them. Hello.
Pretty much.
They'd be like, well, you're not as bad as the last ones.
Yeah. I feel like they kept showing up and picking fights they couldn't win, sort of big vibes of Jeroa. So, I don't know, not to roast the medieval Spaniards. I don't know why I care, but other Europeans.
Got those big Spanish Inquisition fears, like Monty Python. They're gonna burst in the door. We hear you talking all that trash.
I really internalized that. So other Europeans started showing up in the 17th century, and at first everything was nice, and they were conducting peaceful trade, and they built all these trade outposts, and they would basically trade like weapons and manufactured goods for like excess game.
Always with the guns.
Always with the guns.
Yeah, basically, I say. Do you want this? Do you want these guns? It's a terrible.
Basically, the British just like kept showing up and offering them guns, and who knew that a fight would break out once everybody was holding a gun?
The British did actually. It's
yeah, actually they did, because like they started showing up at like 1680, and by 1683 they were starting wars with the local Waccamaw and Winya tribes because they wanted to capture them as slaves. The model was bring African enslaved people to the American, what's now the American Southeast, to work plantations there and capture Native Americans and ship them to the West Indies, because as long as you keep people far from home, then they are not as hopeful of eventual escape.
I'm not even going to crack a joke. Yep. That's what happens.
Yeah. I mean,
I was trying to think of like a witticism to like, no, that might dampen might dull the sharpness of that truth. So let's just keep it rolling.
Yeah. Hey. So this practice tragically destroyed the Winya tribe completely, along with the Santee, the Siwi, and eventually the PD tribes, and reduced the Waccamaw to a tiny fraction of their number. And then that tiny fraction got pushed north into modern-day Horry County, Myrtle Beach, and we've discussed their history there in the UFOs over Myrtle Beach episode, To the Skies. However, I want to note that there is a brand new exhibit of Waccamaw artifacts and historical items that just opened in 2021 in the Horry County Museum, prepared by 35 students and faculty from Coastal Carolina University with the cooperation and endorsement of the Waccamaw tribe. And it looks so cool. I looked at some pictures of it online, and the next time I'm in that area, I'm going to try to go see it. The name Pawleys Island comes from George Pawley, who was granted quote unquote ownership of the island under the English colonial government. He then sold off parcels to other plantation owners. The region on the bay side of the Waccamaw Neck and across the Winya Bay along the rivers feeding it, so like inland, was all used for rice plantations at the time.
It's just so wild to me that like that's how it all went down. They just be like, you did a good job. Here, have this massive tract of land to do with whatever you please.
Yeah, totally. Here, have, several square miles of land. Mm-hmm. And if you want to run that as a real estate investment, then great, have a ball. So these rice plantations were in the marshy parts of the coastal region where there were a ton of mosquitoes. In the Grove Park Inn episode, the Pink Lady episode, we talked about Grove's chill tonic and malaria and mosquitoes in the Southeast.
Yes, we did. It's all coming full circle.
It all ties together. It is so wild to me. And so the people who owned the plantations would often build homes on Pawleys Island where there was a constant breeze. And they would spend May to November living on Pawleys Island while all the people actually doing the backbreaking work would be stuck on the plantation working in salt marshes where the mosquitoes were, because there weren't any mosquitoes on Pawleys Island. So the plantation owners' beach homes which is what they were.
It's just the absurdity of that statement. The plantation owners' beach homes, which sure, of course they had those.
Of course they did. It is one of the things that this show and making this show constantly reminds me of is how close to us history actually is. Like how history is not as far away as we think of it as being.
What it does to me is it just reminds me of what a broke I am.
That's okay. Yeah. Same here.
And they had 6,000 acres, but it wasn't enough. So they got a beach home.
Don't worry, things didn't work out for these folks in the end.
True. So my people weren't even here, so right, I just like, at least I'm carrying on our tradition.
My people were manufacturing moonshine in the Appalachian Mountains, so and speaking weird dialects of English that my editor has problems with today because I still write in it. So
good on you.
So
here's a behind the scenes thing. I wouldn't know because I've never read any of your books. So when
that's true.
When people ask me how are his books, and I go, I don't know. I assume that they're good. But so I'm like, yeah, good for you. Not ever having read any of it. It could be horrible. I wouldn't know.
Well, I don't own a beach house yet, so that tells me something.
All right, goals, man, goals.
So they built these beach homes, and they would build them on like elevated brick platforms to protect them from storm surges associated with tropical storms and hurricanes.
Yep.
And otherwise, like everything that wasn't owned by a plantation owner would just get obliterated and when a hurricane came in. And that part is also relevant.
I'm sure there was a cottage industry around that. Like, oh, good. The storms came through. Now we can charge the people more to rebuild all their crap.
I guarantee that is the case. Yes. So That's Pawleys Island, to give you a sense of the island itself. Barrier Island, very windy on the coast, lots of rich people's houses. The Gray Man of Pawleys Island legend goes like this, and this is sort of the generic take on it. For 2 centuries, starting as early as 1822 and possibly earlier, people have occasionally seen a gray figure walking the beaches of Pawleys Island, South Carolina, usually described as a man in a long gray coat and a gray hat. Most encounters describe him as first being seen walking in the distance, approaching the observer slowly. And in some accounts, if the observer waves or greets him or otherwise sort of politely acknowledges him, he may return that gesture. He might wave back, he might say hello, things like that. In other witness accounts, he approaches you directly and engages you in conversation. And in all cases, regardless, if he says anything other than a polite greeting or offers more than a wave, his only message, which he will happily repeat, will be the dire warning that you must leave immediately.
Creepy.
The Gray Man's appearance and his stern advice always presage a terrible storm arriving on Pawleys Island, a hurricane or a particularly powerful tropical storm, something very big and very destructive.
This is cool. So the way I understood gray people was that just what you said, they appear before storms and that they're sort of like an apparition on the beach or whatever. I didn't know that some of the legends have them interacting with people. I thought it was just something that was seen, not interacted with.
Oh, no, some of them are very interactive.
Okay.
And if you receive this morning, or if you see the Gray Man in the distance, even if you don't interact with him and you leave, then you will safely escape. And if you have a home or any property or anything like that on the island, then when you return after the storm, it will be unscathed. But if you ignore his warning or you ignore having seen him, then you're taking your chances. And the odds are very high that whatever you have will be destroyed and possibly you'll go with it.
Ew.
So here are some times and examples when the Gray Man has been seen. Supposedly in 1822 is the first sighting of the Gray Man. This is reported widely in accounts of the Gray Man, but there's never any further citation. There's never any talk about like who saw him or the names of anybody or anything like that. But there was the 1822 Carolina hurricane, which is believed to have been a category 4 or 5 when it hit and killed hundreds of people, many, many hundreds of people. In 1893, a family called the La Chicote family saw the Gray Man of Pawleys Island while driving a team of mules from Pawleys Island to Georgetown, which is the county seat of Georgetown County. I can't find any attribution or original record for that, but that gets mentioned in the South Carolina Folk Tales book published by the Writers Program of America in 1941. So at the point that was published, it was a fairly recent story. It could have conceivably have been a living memory story. Mm-hmm. And there are census records showing La Chicote families living in Waccamaw at the right time, in the right place, etc. Also, it's often said that he was seen in 1916 before a hurricane hit Pawleys Island, but I have not been able to find any citations for that or who saw him or any details like that. But you get to 1954 and you get a really interesting, very specific story. A guy named Bill Collins, before Hurricane Hazel arrived on Pawleys Island. In some accounts, he's a honeymooner who was vacationing on Pawleys Island with his new bride. And others say that he's a guy who lives in Pawleys Island and owns a car dealership.
Those are a bit of a gap there.
Yeah. In either case, he says that he saw the Gray Man, and in one account that the Gray Man actually knocked on his door and warned him, a terrible storm is coming and you must leave immediately. The account where he just saw the Gray Man, he's the resident of the island who owns a car dealership, and he sees the Gray Man from the porch of his house, says, okay, that's it. We got to get out of here. I've heard the legends. They leave. They come back. Not only is their house the only one standing on their block, but beach towels that he had left hanging over the railing of his deck are still there after the hurricane blows through. In the version where the Gray Man knocks on his door, he's a honeymooner. He thinks that this is a local who has been sent to tell people to leave for their own safety. and heeds this warning only to later return to complete his trip, I guess, and get told, no, we don't know who you're talking about. You saw the gray man of Pawleys Island. So I went digging into that one. There is a Bill Collins who died age 55 in 1967. So he was in his 40s when this happened. He operated a service station on Pawleys Island.
Service stations will always have a used car out front, right?
Yep, exactly. That was exactly my thinking.
I bought one from one once. I bought a Chevy Malibu from a gas station.
Yeah, I believe you.
It was dirt cheap.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
My wife hated that car.
So I really like that one. In 1955, it's often cited that he was seen also in 1955, but again, no information about who saw him or in what circumstances or anything like that. This is also the mid-50s is when stories of the gray man start to appear in wider popular culture. At the time, there was a historian named Julian Bollock who was beginning a series of books that chronicled the history of Georgetown County. And in that, he started talking about the gray man. Then in 1989, Hurricane Hugo.
Yeah, I remember Hurricane Hugo.
Yep, there you go. I mean, even up in the mountains, we saw effects from Hurricane Hugo. Nothing like was seen, in Charlotte or in South Carolina, but, we saw stuff. In 1989, a family who lived on Pawleys Island, a couple of retired people, reported that they saw the gray man, waved at him, he waved back, and warned them that they should leave. And they did leave. The hurricane blew in. If I remember correctly, Hurricane Hugo blew in on a path other than what was predicted. And so when Hurricane Hugo blew through, it destroyed almost every house in their neighborhood, but theirs was completely untouched.
I mean, that was, for people that are able to remember, it was a monumental experience at the time. I guess I was very small. Like, I was a kid. But I remember there being like community efforts to go to the affected areas and help people. Like, it was that bad. It was like, okay, well, people need to come together from across great geographical distance to help these people that have been impacted by this storm.
It was a huge deal. I was a teenager when it happened, and it was an enormous deal. Unsolved Mysteries did an episode that included the gray man of Pawleys Island. They found the Moors, the people who lived on the island and had reported this, and interviewed them, had them take them out with their cameras to the place on the island where they saw him even, and tell their version of the story. It's a great episode, a lot of fun, and you can stream Unsolved Mysteries online somewhere. So go looking for that episode if you are curious to see somebody talk about it in a really relatively modern context.
So speaking of modern context, you said that part of the lore here is that he'll give you a greeting, like just a general thing. But other than that, it's just like a broken record. Like, you need to leave. You need to leave.
Yeah.
Okay. So parking at the beach is always terrible. Imagine seeing this gray man. You're like, hey, and it's hello. Yeah. Where's a good place to park? You need to leave. Okay. Is this like a locals only beach? You need to leave. Wow. Is there public parking anywhere? You need to leave. This is the worst beach trip I've ever been on.
That's called hospitality.
Yeah.
That's really funny. And that would be an amazing way to get the beach less populated.
Maybe. That would be a funny prank.
Wouldn't it?
Just dress up as the gray man and just be seen walking down the beach one morning and see how many people pick up their stuff and leave.
Yeah. I bet a lot of people would. Apparently these days, every now and then somebody will tweet, I just saw the gray man on Pawleys Island. I am getting out of here. I don't know. I at least saw a couple of citations of somebody who tweeted about that, and then their account no longer existed. So I can't go verify it. Oh, well.
Spooky.
Right?
Spooky tweets.
So then a modern day instance of it, like a very modern instance of it, there's a site online called monstervisiontv.wordpress.com.
It would be better if it was just Monster Vision TV.
They posted an account in which a local who lives in Murrells Inlet, which is just like minutes from Pawleys Island. It's another little inlet barrier island kind of area. They say that a local who lived there named Leo Martin told them that he saw the gray man when he had been out on his boat for the day, and he was returning in the evening, and he saw someone in the gray man's traditional dress, a long gray coat, kind of dressed in old-fashioned clothes, gray hair, very gray, generally appearance. And he thought that this person was playing a prank because he was familiar with the legend.
Yes.
And so when he saw this person in that dress, they were waving at him from the shore. He thought maybe this is somebody who needs help. So he sort of steered his boat closer to the shore to see if he could find out what was up. Then he got close enough to realize that's the gray man, at which point he thought somebody was playing a prank. So then he got kind of angry. But the closer he got to the person standing on the shore, he began to realize that the gray man standing there was translucent.
Ooh.
So he said, well, that's it. I've been out on the boat too long. I've been in the sun too long. I'm going to get out of here and go back home. He went back home. The next day, a tropical storm blew through and wrecked a bunch of stuff. And he might have been out on his boat, except that he got a little spooked by the gray man having been there and decided not to.
Cool. I like that one. Well, see, that's the thing. When I asked, like, my understanding always was that they were like spectral. So it's so interesting to me that there's interactions.
Well, in almost all of these accounts, either he appears sort of out of a gray mist, or he disappears into a gray mist, or people approach him and realize that he is spectral. He's semi-translucent, or he like doesn't have legs below the knee. He's just hovering in the air, things like that. So in the case of Leo Martin, I was like, well, this is a name. This is a place.
Yeah.
This sounds like a pretty verifiable fact. Oh, yeah, he exists. He's in the phone book for Murrells Inlet. He's easy to find.
Nice.
Yeah.
This is cool. Yeah.
Much like the ghost town of Goshen Hill, there are a ton of reports. They're very consistent. They range from many different time periods and many different types of people reporting it.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we always come back to. So the fellow that saw Gray Man on the shore from the boat has nothing to gain financially from this story.
Yeah, zero.
Nothing.
Yeah, he told some people who like run a blog.
Right. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
So that raised the question for me of who is the Gray Man? Because at this point, I'm convinced that the Gray Man is a real phenomenon. There are a lot of theories on who is the Gray Man. The first one is George Pawley, that guy that the English government said, okay, now you own this island.
It must be nice.
Right. The timeline works out because he died in the 18th century. So he's good and dead by 1822, which is supposedly the first time he was seen.
Okay.
But there's no other like narrative explanation for why he would be there or care. I don't personally buy him as the source of the Gray Man because it's clear that Pawley kind of treated this and the entire area as like one big real estate deal waiting to happen and not something that was like especially close to his heart. I don't know.
I'm just thinking about, we come back to time and time again, the stone tape theory and like emotional or however you want to frame it, energy being constant, right? So energy can only be displaced. It can't be destroyed. Is that the old expression?
It can be converted. It cannot be destroyed.
Right. Something like that. So like, I'm here right now talking to you and I'm physically here. And if I were to die, I would remain physically here until that decomposed. This is getting really dark. At which point,
for the record, I would end the Zoom call.
it'd be a long call to wait for this to happen. But then eventually, like at an atomic level, I would still be there. Like the atoms that comprised me would still exist in the universe doing whatever it is atoms do after they're done being you.
Yes.
So I am willing. I guess what I'm trying to communicate is that I can wrap my head around, yes, the Gray Man phenomena is real, and I'm backing you up with, but it doesn't align with anything that I could make sense of based on this individual. I'm Team Michael on that one.
So the most popular explanation for him is this guy named Plowden C.J. Weston. He owned Hagley Plantation, which bordered Pawleys Island's inner edge, and it was one of the many rice plantations in the area. A special note for Hamilton fans: Weston bought Hagley Plantation from Aaron Burr's son-in-law.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
There you go.
Like everywhere else, Hagley was plagued with malaria, no pun intended. So Weston built a home on Pawleys Island to avoid mosquitoes for himself and his wife and nobody else on the plantation. This is one of the more repeated explanations for it, that the gray man is the ghost of Weston, because Weston died of tuberculosis at a relatively young age. And before he and his wife had had any children, and his wife, heartbroken, immediately moved back to England after his death. A lot of people say, well, he loved the area so much, he had put so much time into it, etc., that he becomes the gray man. The problem there is that Hagley died in 1864. The gray man was supposedly first seen in 1822. So automatically, right out of the gate, in literally the first paragraph of the one version of this story that has been copied and pasted to everywhere on the internet, from different people who describe themselves as paranormal researchers to literally a real estate company's websites. This version has just been copied and pasted, lifted wholesale, and in the first line, there's an obvious, provably incorrect thing. So I don't buy this one either. It just has to be discounted out of hand. It's not even worth going into the why behind it.
For our listeners, I'm going to throw a flag on the field and call a timeout, whatever you want to say. This is a part of our fall 2021 lineup. That we didn't mention that at the beginning. And in this block of episodes that we've recorded, you've heard us say that type of stuff repeatedly, where it's like, we don't buy into the cut and paste jobs. It's not because we don't like the story. It's because we're trying to find that bit of real history to relate things to. So we're not trying to be mean. We're trying to be real.
Yeah. The thing is, I think I said this in our live episode of Arcane-Carolinas. I love this stuff. I believe in a lot of this stuff. I believe in it, and thus I want to find the actual historical explanation rather than just settling for sort of, somebody's made up purple prose version. And the version in which Weston's ghost is the gray man of Pawleys Island is very purple prosy. There's a lot of faithful service to South Carolina kind of stuff trying to back it up, but it is heavily romanticized, clearly fictional. It is just whole cloth, made up, manufactured. Literally, the story of the peddler and the mastiff from the ghost town of Goshen Hill has a better chance of being true. Because at least it is not demonstrably false.
You're selling me, though. I'm on board with all your theories so far.
So another theory is that it's the person who purchased Hagley Plantation from Weston's widow.
Okay.
His cousin and a fellow plantation owner named William St. Julian Mazik. Like I said, Mazik was this cousin of his. He was a fellow plantation owner, and Weston's will directed that if his wife was going to move back to England on his death, then she needed to sell the plantation to Mazik, which she did. She sold the whole plantation to Mazik in return for an annual income from him, basically, and to pay off Weston's extensive debts. And in August of 1864, the plantation changed hands. Reading a transcript of the official settlement, which is not difficult to find, it's an official document of history. It demonstrates that part of the story is true, and it's especially horrifying for how it speaks about his estate in a lot of different ways. But included in that estate was what is referred to as the P.C.J. Weston House on Pawleys Island, which is that beach home that they have. Mazik and his wife retired from the plantation in 1884, left it to fall into ruin, literally, just abandoned it completely.
I'm done here.
And then
what did you do to begin with?
Right. Yeah.
I'm tired.
He mostly lived in the PCJ Weston house while other people died on his property. But
right, that's what I'm saying. It's just funny.
Yeah, it's so weird to me.
You retired. What were you doing before? No, I was sitting here.
In literally exactly the same place. So Mazik and his wife turned the PCJ Weston house, the beach house, into what is now the Pelican Inn after that retirement. And it's a bed and breakfast to this day. You can go there and stay in the place and eat gourmet meals and have events there and all kinds of stuff.
What a wonderful bird, the pelican. Its beak can hold more than its belly can.
Really? Oh, all right. I've never heard that little rhyme.
There's a whole limerick.
Oh, okay. They eventually, of course, died, but and they sold the plantation eventually, the abandoned plantation, and had it all logged and clear cut at the turn of the 20th century.
As was the style at the time, you see.
Right. Eileen Weaver was one of the subsequent owners, as it changed hands through the years as people retired as the innkeepers. She owned and operated the Pelican Inn from the 1940s to the 1970s. And in the 1950s, she told Julian Bollock, while he was working on his history of Georgetown County, that she had seen 2 ghosts many times at the Pelican Inn. The first time she was in the kitchen of the inn kneading bread, and a woman appeared dressed in gray head to toe in what she described as old-fashioned clothes and semi-translucent, staring at her with an expression that she said looked like, "You better not mess that up." She said that also she eventually saw the husband's Mr. Mazique's ghost appear, and that the ghosts were so routinely seen around the Pelican Inn that sometimes guests would sit in a particular parlor and wait, because most afternoons they would get to see the ghost of Mrs. Mazique appear walking up the steps and then disappear when she got to the top.
This place is still open?
Yeah, totally.
Field trip!
Right? It's pretty pricey, but it's not Grove Park Inn pricey,
Okay.
But it's in the neighborhood of like, that's on the list of things I could do one day. However, she said they weren't associated with the storms at all. She said they just showed up all the time. It didn't have anything to do with whether they're hurricanes. When she told Bollock the story of the 2 ghosts in the Pelican Inn, she didn't know who they were. So he pulled out a whole bunch of photographs from historical time periods, different eras of history of people from Pawleys Island. She picked out the Maziques in her lineup and said, yep, that's definitely them. But she didn't have any idea who they were. She didn't even know that they were previous owners of the same inn that she owned.
This is really cool.
To give you another taste of the flavor, sort of the personality they had as ghosts, her kids had like chores around the place, cleaning up and stuff. And they eventually reported to her that they had been having run-ins with these ghosts all the time, but they were afraid to tell her because they thought they would get in trouble for making up stories. One of them said that she would take a break sometimes to read the comic books that were left out, because Weaver would leave magazines and stuff in a particular reading parlor. And she described to Bollock that she would change out the magazines every season when they opened on Memorial Day, but that she had a stock of comic books that she left out all the time because the kids always wanted to read the comics. It didn't really matter if they were old. And so one of her children, while cleaning that parlor, took a break, leaned against a cupboard to read one of the comic books. And while standing there reading a comic book, felt someone tug sharply on the edge of her shirt. Ooh. When she turned around, there's the ghost of Mrs. Mazique, giving her that "get back to work, girly" kind of look. And then she disappears. And apparently that sort of thing happened to the kids all the time.
This is great. I like these ghosts.
Yeah, probably not the gray people because it doesn't match anything else about the story, but super fun. And ghosts of people that inherited the property from one of the candidates for the ghost. Mm-hmm. The other most popular explanation is the dead fiancé story.
Oh, yeah, I know this one. Yep.
Yeah. So in theory, shortly before this 1822 sighting, or totally the beginning of it, some man was returning to the island to marry his bride on the night before their wedding, and he has with him his, quote, servant, his enslaved man. And on the way there, gets thrown by his horse into a salt marsh and drowns tragically.
Wow.
And then the enslaved man is with him.
Tragically.
Make sure you record this happened, but not my name.
Remember me always. No, you know what? Remember me like kind of.
So, the enslaved man with him, who witnesses this, is not able to save him and reports it to the bride-to-be the next day.
I'm totally going to get in trouble for this. It wasn't my fault.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. So she, in her mourning, begins to just wander the beach daily, refusing to resume life, refusing to take on any new quarters, anything like that.
I'm going to wander forever.
Pretty much. And in the course of her wanderings, eventually, she sees what she is pretty sure is her beloved in the distance. She runs to him, and he warns her that she and her family must leave the island immediately.
You got to go.
This is like, I think this is just probably the most complicated breakup in history. And
but I've missed you. You got to go. I can say one thing. I can say two things. I can say hello, and you got to go. And I already said hello, so you got to go.
So he like warns her that you and your family must leave the island immediately, and then disappears. And again, this is coming from the same source that gets copied and pasted everywhere, so it's very embroidered. She goes home, tells her family that this has happened, and her family says, well, you're our very serious daughter. You would never make anything up like this, so we believe you. Let's pack it all up and leave. They do. The next day, a hurricane arrives, wipes out everybody around them, but not them. And thus the legend is born. Interestingly, one of the things that I read is, like I said, in 1822, there was the 1822 Carolina hurricane. Hundreds of people died. Most of those were enslaved people who were basically abandoned when the hurricane rolled in. And one commentary on that story that I read was really interesting. It suggested a really interesting take, which is that origin story is a way to talk about the fact that there was a huge tragedy and it affected enslaved people. By having sort of at the center of it this enslaved man who has to deliver the news. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, no, it's a way of acknowledging history.
Yeah. And then my least favorite take, briefly, is that it's Blackbeard. Of course.
No, seriously? Get out.
Sometimes people claim, like some versions of the story.
Hold on. That is the dumbest thing.
Yeah. There are versions of the story in which the guy looks less like a guy dressed as a 19th century dude in gray and more like a pirate in gray.
Yarr.
Yeah.
Y'all be getting on your way now.
Yeah. And people like try to say that Blackbeard stashed part of his treasure on Pawleys Island and all kinds of stuff.
Apparently there's Blackbeard's treasure in my backyard because he put it everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, like, my God, I've heard of having a diverse portfolio, but this is ridiculous. So it's like he's somebody who lived through the Depression and has accounts in like 14 different banks. That was a thing in my hometown in Horseshoe for sure.
Spread them all around.
Yeah, totally. You just never know when the bank's going to go under. And having seen the recession of 2008, maybe they were right.
Right.
So, but ultimately with Blackbeard, like, is there anywhere this guy does not show up? No. The answer is no. I'm shocked that there's not a version of the ghost town of Goshen Hill that's Blackbeard's dog. So but like my personal take on it, much like the ghost town, there are a ton of sightings, ton of reports from different eras by different people, almost none of whom tried to use it to get rich or famous. I'm sure that those nice people on Unsolved Mysteries got compensated for their time, and they probably got plenty of attention, and they probably got to tell that story over dinner parties for the next 10 years of their lives. But nobody gets rich seeing the gray man. I don't know. For my money, he's real, and we have no idea who he is, and we never will.
Yeah.
And that's part of the spooky fun of the story. So it's like people always try to come up with this tidy narrative to explain the unexplained and perhaps the inexplicable. And I think that serves to separate us from the spooky fun because it gives us a way to sort of tuck this into the back of the drawer of the mind.
Right. And so going back to my point of like, I believe that it's likely a person that had some sort of strong emotional energy tied to the place, right? Or like left some kind of imprint due to an experience. That doesn't have to be tied to one of these prominent names. That could just be some dude that lived there.
Yeah. It could be a sailor. It could be a spirit of the land trying to warn people. It could be like, what if it's the ghost of one of those Wakama who got kidnapped and taken elsewhere to be a slave, returning to try to warn his people? Like, there are so many different ways to take this story.
Aliens.
It could be aliens.
Probably not, but maybe.
Maybe. And like, one of the things that I found interesting about this is whoever he is, he seems to only want to help people. He never wants to harm people.
Yeah.
He provides this like sort of this like much needed note of kindness and compassion in the supernatural world, which I think is like sort of shockingly rare in the supernatural world. And I think that missing note of kindness is why people work so hard to come up with tidy narratives that can turn it into a kinder story.
It's like the helpful stranger in the Fallout games, except it just appears sometimes. Generally, you're battling some sort of mutant bug in those cases. In this case, he's telling you to leave, but still,
yeah,
that kind of like dun, 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 helpful stranger, and then they're gone.
Yeah. And unlike with the Ghost Town of Goshen Hill, where you didn't see any versions of the narrative until somebody was getting paid to write books about that, this story does actually get mentioned in South Carolina Folktales, published in 1941, before anybody was writing books about this. It kind of gets mentioned in passing, but it is specifically described as a harbinger of disaster, and it references the Lechicote family's encounter in specific in like one sentence as an allusion that it makes in the preface to a different story altogether, which will be the second story in the series.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the research on that. That was fun. I like these ones where I get to come in and be like, I don't know, I heard a thing. Enlighten me.
I also think it's worth noting that there are people who claim that Hatteras Island in North Carolina also has a gray man.
Yeah. This is like the Dram Tree thing, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like all up and down the coast.
Yeah. My notes on that are literally this. I quote directly, like, what in the actual heck? Even everything you read about the Hatteras Island gray man will literally just be Hatteras Island has a gray man. Just like Pawleys Island. Here's the Pawleys Island story. There's nothing about the North Carolina version of this.
Yeah. Let's give South Carolina their credit here.
Yeah.
Don't take their gray man.
And there are a bunch of stories about Pawleys Island. This might turn out to be a 4-episode thing because there's a totally unrelated hurricane disaster story that makes for a great spooky story that I'll throw in at the end of the series.
Sweet. All right. Stay tuned for more Gray Man at some point. One day.
Thank you for listening and for letting me ramble about Gray Man forever.
No, this was great. Be sure to check out our social media pages. Give us a like on whatever podcast service you listen to. Give us a review. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just got a 4 out of 5 star one, and it was still very constructive and valuable.
Yeah.
What else? Arcanecarolinas.com. You can check out the web store and buy some stuff. Probably have a live appearance booked by the time this airs. That will be all over our Facebook page.
And follow us on Facebook because that's where you'll see all kinds of good stuff.
Thanks for hanging out. I don't have much else other than Blackbeard, get out. Stupid. It is terrible. It's lazy.
Thanks for listening, unless you're Blackbeard, in which case, go away.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards.